Hey, Barren Community, Jeff back again. Time for another Sunday A to Z's in Christian rock and metal. But Jeff, you finished with the Z's last week. I did. And but yeah, we're going to move into the miscellaneous, the compilations, the things along that line. Compilation, that's a good term. Anyway, yes, so there are a handful of compilations. They were not in the alphabetical order there that I felt worth covering. Because back in the day, as most labels, there was always compilations put out. It's a way to introduce you to artists. It's a way to, get you exposure to a bunch of the bands on the label. And so the compilations, are out there. We grew up with them. They're everywhere. So the Christian market was no different. They did the same thing. And at times they would put songs on there, of course, that weren't on the album, which made it even greater because now you're like, great, I get an extra track. And so we see that a couple times. They also, similar to the mainstream market, they had like growing up for us, Metal Massacre was the series. That was where all the unsigned bands came. Metal Blade would put out these albums of all these unsigned bands, and it was a way to be introduced to a lot of the underground bands. Now, a lot of those bands did end up getting signed, but this is the early days. So obviously, like if you're familiar with that, the whole first Metal Massacre album had early Metallica on it. It had bands that we now are just typical known to us bands. But back then they were like, hey, here, check out these new bands. So that kind of stuff was happening, in the Christian market too. And so that's the kind of stuff we'll see here. But let's jump into this. The first one is the Axman. This was a compilation focused on guitar-driven characters, guitar-driven people in there. So while the songs are listed, the bold names are the focused guitar player. Rex Carroll, Troy Thompson, things like that. So Dee Harrington. So it's the focus on the guitar player in the band. Now the thing about, so you've got all your bands recognized here. You've got the White Crosses and the Brides and the Jerusalems and the Daniel Bands and the Rosanna's Raiders and Novella, all of the bands of the day, Bjorn Stixon. The thing that made this album worth it at the time was the song by Jerusalem, Covered by Blood, was not on the album Dancing on the Head of the Serpent, which is the album that came out the year this did. Now, it was on the album overseas, where they're from, but the U.S. version did not have that. So that was great to have this, to be able to get this, on a different format, especially on CD, because then we had that song on CD, which it was not on the CD at the time. Now, then later, or around the same time, they released a double disc compilation of Jerusalem. The label did. It was a double disc, kind of a best of, incorporating all of their releases. And on that album was supposed to be Covered by Blood. And I believe the studio version of the song Time, which was only available on a live version, those were listed, or at least Covered by Blood was listed as being on the CD. And the vinyl, which I think I have, but it was not. So it was just a printing error. And so we did not have the song on CD on that album either. So, it was great to have that on this album. And so now the album has been reissued in the US, and it has all the tracks, including that. So, but back then it was great to have that extra track. All right, these next three I'm going to go through real quick. These are going to, they stray from the heavier edge, but sort of kind of not really. But these just recently came in, and I had not shown them, so this is a good time to do it. The Browbeat series just got reissued by, was it Retroactive, I believe? They reissued it about a month or so ago. And what these are is they got together a bunch of the alternative, it's called alternative worship, unplugged alternative, a lot of the alternative bands of the day, and got them together to do kind of worship type music. So it's a little bit on the slower side, not worship as in like Christian worship music like you hear today, but just a little bit mellower on some cases. Some of the songs were on other albums, like Lost Dogs No Ship Coming In, I think the Dig Jesus song, anyway, Poor Old Lou. I think some of these songs may have been on other releases, but some of these were written specifically for this. And these were reissued on vinyl for the first time just recently. I have the CD of this. I've had it for years. Love this album. A lot of stuff like The Choir and Terry Taylor, people like that made this album out. And it was just a great album back in the day. So seeing that on vinyl was cool. I also have this on CD. This is the second one, Browbeat's Weather Wing. And so a lot of the same characters, but in this case, there are some other ones. But you got Terry Scott Taylor and Michael Knott and some of these guys that are doing a lot of the same stuff. So is this the one? I think this has got Plank Eye, Adam again, well, Gene Eugene, the late Gene Eugene, anyway. So again, a lot of similar stuff, and it's a little bit upbeat. It's not, like I say, it's not real worshipful. It's just they considered it alternative worship, so it's got quite an edge to it at times. And then the third one, alternative worship again. This one doesn't actually say Browbeats on it, but it's still technically the same. But this one actually is quite a bit edgier. This one's got a lot of Michael Knott, LSU Underground, his solo albums, great stuff like that. And didn't he passed away recently, I believe. Anyway, so it's got a couple songs by, it's got Terry Taylor and Gene Eugene, and then Michael Knott. So it's kind of more of a Michael Knott album. And it's got quite a bit of upbeatness to it. It's, like I say, it's not in any manner slow. So all three of these albums just reissued, so check them out. Great stuff. All right, and then we're moving into, so one of the first earliest ones that I remember, at least in the metal movement, was California Metal. This album was pivotal to a lot. Listen to this all the time. This Regency Records was a label that did quite a bit of great stuff. They released a lot of the bands back in the day. This is where it kind of all started. And there's some bands on here that went on to be big, or that were already on the road to getting big. But then there are some that, were one-offs that never made it much further. So you have Deliverance on here. This was really the first time we heard Deliverance. And they have two songs on here. Barren Cross, we already heard Barren Cross, but they were on here with a couple songs that were later redone on a song later redone on one of their albums. Two songs by Guardian, which they were the early demo versions of the songs that they did make it to the album later when they were signed, but they were polished up and different sounding. Two songs by a band called Hero, the band Robbie Braun's led band. He was formerly of Holy Soldier, but I don't think they went anywhere beyond that. Mastodon, which is the first time we heard Mastodon, that's the Elefante Brothers version. And then two songs by Neon Cross, which were an up-and-coming band at the time. The Regency later did release an album or so by. So yeah, it was great stuff. Again, this would be similar to like the Metal Massacre. These are mostly unsigned bands that they've compiled together into a great album there. And then you have California Metal 2. Again, Elefante Brothers come in, picked up a bunch of bands that were unsigned at the time and released them. So we had Mastodon again. They had to pop up because that was their band. So they did that stuff too. Soldier, which was a band that was very underrated and never really saw the light of day there. Couple by Emerald, who had an album out already that was recently reissued in the past couple years by No Remorse Records overseas. Ransom, up-and-coming band, a song from their demo that was great. Vision, which was the new name for Malachi, their albums were recently reissued. These are bands that never really... Ransom had a couple actual albums out. Judea, they never really got signed. And then Recon, Light the Fire, they were signed. And, of course, went on to just do the one album, great stuff. And then George Ochoa, the guitar player, went on to do a bunch of other stuff, including Deliverance and the new band Human Code, which we just see that their album just got pre-ordered. So California Metal 2, again, another way to introduce you to a bunch of bands from the California area that we were not familiar with. And then they did one called East Coast Metal, same label. And this is all the East Coast bands. So you got Apostle, band from Florida that so underrated and should really have had their material released. I used to talk to Matt, the main guy behind it, guitar player, songwriter, everything, back in the day. I talked to him a handful of years ago. He was in the process of remastering everything to put out like a box set, because Apostle put out all kinds of tapes, but never really, got signed. So he was in the process of working on that, converting everything, getting it all done, and then he passed away. This was a good decade or so ago, so I don't know whatever happened to that work. Arsenal, they got signed and had a record out. They had two on here. Believer, we know Believer went on to be pretty huge. They had a first song on here, which was really killer from their, I think it was from their demo, wasn't it? Rage of Angels, of course, we know they put out an album that was amazing. They have a song on here. Second Chance, they are actually from up the road here, up a couple hours above me, and they later changed their name to Armageddon. And actually, the guitar player from that band reached out to me a couple months ago and said, hey, we may be getting the band back together to do just a one-off show in December, and he wanted to know if I could do drums for him. And I'm like, absolutely, because their drummer, Joe Hasselvander, has been having some health issues, and so they just were going to put something together there. Taker, another band that they never really got signed. They did put out a CD that was of their demo stuff, but they're also, some of the guys in Taker were in Second Chance or in Armageddon now. And then the lead, Florida thrashy punk band. Great stuff. Absolutely great way to be introduced to a bunch of bands at that point. This is one that kind of falls out of the category of the heavier stuff. This is Electric Holyland. For a second there, I forgot what it was. This was released in 2009. It is a compilation of 70s Fuzz, Psych and Fuzz in the Christian realm. So absolutely just a great album. I don't know what else to say about it. Fuzz, Psych, fuzzy type stuff. All right, Front Row. This is one that's a little off of the heavier thing, but I wanted to mention it. Refuge Records, kind of a branch of what we consider, well, pure metal, but it's a branch of Refuge. And the thing about this album, and this guy, you know, it's got Rick Koo, it's got a bunch of bands, Eating a Doll, a bunch of commercial type rock bands. But the thing that made me want to buy this, at least and back in the day and now, is Jerusalem. This album did have, this is the same label that Jerusalem was on. This album did have the studio version of the song Time, which prior to that was only available on their live album. So this was the first time we got Time, the studio version. I'm assuming it must have been released on one of their albums overseas, but not in the US at the time. So there we go. That was great to have because it was a song that we did not have access to in the US in normal means. This is actually a recently released compilation along that line. Limited run vinyl. Of course, we know limited run vinyl is, you know, working with Retroactive Records and with Girder and how they do all these 100 pieces of releases. And so what they did is they put out a compilation of a bunch of the songs from those albums. Some of these were, so not all of these have been released on vinyl. So there is a compilation of stuff here that is, you know, maybe one day, maybe they're working on it, maybe one day we'll see it. So that's kind of cool to have a vinyl release of some songs that at this point are not on vinyl. So again, the compilation to introduce you to things. Another one, similar to the other one, real remembered. This one, again, this has the Daniel Band on it. It's got DeGarmo and Key. It's got Jerusalem, Joe English of Paul McCartney and Wings fame. I'm drawing a blank as to whether there was a song on here that made it. Maybe I just bought this because, but a lot of times I would buy these because there was a song on here that wasn't available elsewhere. This one's drawn a blank. I think maybe I just acquired this in the package deal, and I'm like, sure, I'll take it. It's cool to have compilations of bands because I don't have anything literally on, you know, by the Wall Brothers or Bonnie Bramlett. I do have some Ed Raskloff. So anyway, just compilation type stuff, fun stuff on the edgier side of, you know, rock. The Tunesmith Sampler, I've mentioned Tunesmith before, Canadian label. In the early days, early in the 70s, pretty much everything on Tunesmith was going to be rock to hard rock. And so we kind of bought stuff on Tunesmith that was along that line. And here's a compilation. Some of the stuff was a little poppier because back then, you know, things. So you got Quick Flight and Servant. You got Amaziah. Yeah, they were kind of on the edgier side of rock. And then you have Barnabas. Barnabas was like the hardest, edgiest band on their label, I believe. Servant, Quick Flight, a lot of the same things. So compilation that was picked up. I don't know if any of these songs are not on their albums, but it's just a compilation in general. So fun stuff. And then underground metal, similar to the East Coast metal and the California metal. This is just, hey, they're not East Coast, they're not West Coast, they're underground. And so this was, again, a compilation that they put out. Armada, band from Michigan, they put out their own stuff. They never really got signed. They Bjorn Stixon, we know from you know, the guitar player from Leviticus. He had a solo album, so that's on here. Chariot, Florida band that never got signed. A lot of these bands, their archives of their material from the demo days or from the self-release days have been released. We have seen an Armada release. We've seen a Chariot release. Chosen Stranger never really got signed. We have a Chosen Stranger CD that came out like last year. Mercy Rule, they did have one album out, recently reissued on vinyl and CD a couple months ago. Paragon, a underrated band that really needs some kind of release. They had two amazing cassette releases, high quality. Drummer is phenomenal. He's went on to do a lot of stuff, and he's still around. And he's a great drummer. A lot of Rush influences, a lot of amazing drumming like that, like Neil Peart. Paradox, again, another band that never really got signed, but we did recently see all of their vinyl and everything on vinyl and CD in the past couple years. With that Wrath album being a few months ago, that was like the final Paradox thing. Texas band there. Torn Flesh, they had an album out, very punkish. And then Watchmen, Fear No Evil, another band, and I heard somebody talking about it online the other day. They were talking about how Watchmen need to be reissued. They had a CD on Regency. They had a cassette that came out on their own, which was probably better than the CD in some ways. And so those two releases really need reissued. And so I'm hoping somebody at some point will pick that up and do it. This was cool because it's got the hype sticker and everything on there. I don't even know. Forget where I picked that up. And then last but not least, this is one that's kind of interesting because it's like, is it a compilation? Is it a soundtrack? Yes, it is. This is a soundtrack to that movie, Electric Jesus. It came out 3 years ago. A movie about, a guy and a band and a Christian band back in the days and some of the things that they went through and the troubles and the temptations. And it was a cool movie because it kind of represented a lot of what some of us kind of grew up around. Some of the deals behind the doors and some of the struggles that bands go through and all that. And then the soundtrack is the fictitious band that's in the movie, some of their songs, and then other songs by other bands that are in the soundtrack itself. So it was cool, kind of a neat thing. The songs from the fictitious band is, they're very 80s because it comes from that era. And then there's just some other stuff on here that's a little more alternative and killer. So fun stuff. There you go. That's a compilation collection from my compilations. And that's going to be it for this one. And I said I probably will move now into, I'm going to start move into the lighter side of things, maybe just to introduce some people to some of the the pop side of Christian music. But we'll see. I was kind of mainly focusing on Christian rock because not a lot of people know a lot about it, so even all these years later. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Rock on and rock hard.